Okay, so we can actually sign in now, which is pretty cool. We've already implemented the ability to sign in. When I hit log out though, we're not doing anything because we have an empty log out page. So inside of log out, let's look at the functionality we need to log the user out. And you'll be probably pleased to know this isn't hard at all. So inside of log out, we need to utilize all of the functionality within Google Auth. We need the database, or we don't really need the database, but we're going to dependency inject the database and the Google client in here, just for sort of the fact that we are working with injecting this in anyway. Obviously, the bigger your application gets, the more you'll need to tidy this up, but we'll go ahead and roll with this anyway. So we're going to require in app init.php. The database is going to be a new DB instance. The Google client is going to be a new Google client. Auth is going to be a new Google Auth. And remember, we're passing in the DB and the Google client. Another reason why I've basically kept this here is you may want to use the database functionality when you log a user out. You might want to set a specific field in your database when you log a user out. The same with the Google client. You may need to access the API to check something before you sign a user out. So it's best to include this anyway, but if you don't need it, you can probably get away with not requiring the DB in Google client. So what you could probably do is you could say that these two are optional, and you don't have to do these. So if these aren't passed in, just don't do this. And then you can just call the logout method. In fact, we'll look at that in just a moment and we'll see how that works. So inside of logout now, we basically want to call auth logout. We haven't created this method yet, so we will do that now. But we also want to redirect to index.php. In your case, it may be a different page. We want to redirect the user nevertheless, because otherwise they'll just land on this page and it'll be a wiped page. So let's create this logout method now. So the logout method is extremely simple. It's one line of code. And that line is basically unsetting the access token session. So remember, this is the token that basically tells us that we're logged in. Remember that we check it here and we set it here. So that basically gives us access based on this session. So if we remove that session, we remove this line here being run, and therefore we don't set access. So when we hit log out, that is unset and we're redirected. Much like when we just removed this session here, we're effectively doing exactly the same thing with that method. So we're just creating a more useful way of logging a user out. Cool, so that is basically done now. You've signed a user out. But let's take a look at what if you don't need to create a new DB instance and you don't need to create a new DB client. We'll just briefly run over this because it may be in your case that you don't need it and it would be silly not to go over this. So let's just comment these out. Let's say we don't want to include a new Google client, we don't want to include a new DB, whatever. So what we would do is we would remove passing these in. Inside of Google Auth, we would set these to, or we would say maybe if these aren't set or something like that, because at the moment we would get a argument 1 must be an instance of DB, but what we could probably do is fiddle this around just to say, well, if these aren't set, then we don't include them basically. There are better ways to do this, but you can play around with this how you need. But as I said, you may need a DB connection, you may need your Google client to be passed through whatever you're doing in logout. It might be a little more complicated. So that's how we log a user out. We'll just hit this again. So we can sign in now. And then we can hit log out and that signs us out, basically just kills the session.